Hello fellow sim racers. Today I'm taking a look at the new 2018 WTCR pack for Raceroom. First of all, sorry the video has taken about a week to put together. The pack was released about 12 hours before I needed to head off to Silverstone for the World Endurance Championship, and when I got back home on Monday I was greeted with a video card that decided it no longer wanted to continue rendering the cockpits of race cars, and decided to opt out in a rather smoky fashion. But excuses aside, let's get down to business. First up, a small helping of context. WTCR is the new for 2018 replacement for the World Touring Car Championship and the old TC1 regulations, which didn't seem overly popular with either manufacturers or privateers. So enter the TCR format, which has been kicking around for some time now and is hugely successful, thanks in no small part to regulations that stop manufacturers from ruining everyone's fun. TCR is now the de facto standard for national touring car championships, and thanks to the sensible format and a huge variety and availability of cars, it made a lot of sense for the Premier International Touring Car Series to adopt the format. What that means for us sim racing types is that this pack replicates all of the entries into the 2018 WTCR season. In terms of cars, that's the Audi RS3, Seat Cupra, Honda Civic, VW Golf, Alfa Giulietta, the Peugeot 308 and the Hyundai i30. Not a bad selection at all. First of all, despite the many commonalities between the TCR cars, the 7 cars in this pack do all have distinct handling characteristics, which can only be a good thing for sim racers. That being said, they do share a lot of common traits. For example, all of these cars need to be driven very smoothly, particularly when it comes to the brake and throttle. Managing smooth weight transfer is vitally important, and in particular, how you release the throttle has a big impact on the car's behaviour. Yes, lift-off oversteer is a big factor here, and it ranges from mildly problematic in some cars to what did I ever do to deserve this in others. I'm looking at you, Mr. Peugeot. As I alluded earlier, these cars need a specific style of driving. You won't be able to jump in, tweak a few camber settings and get them to conform to the way you want to drive. You need to adapt to the car, not the other way around. And once you get past the everything's a bit weird feeling, it all makes a lot of sense, and driving these cars is a real pleasure. But do be sure to avoid the sausage curbs. These are cars that long for their life inverted, and they do everything they can to aid you in getting them onto their roofs. I've read some disparaging comments complaining that the rears are far too planted and you can't get the back end out. But I find that line of thought a bit ridiculous if I'm honest. These are racing cars, they're designed to be stable so they go around a track as fast as possible. It's not you and your mate Dave in his XR2 causing havoc in Tesco car park. To me, these cars are pretty believable. Moreover, if you compare footage of how they behave on track to the footage of the real thing, the result is very convincing indeed. Obviously, I have no experience with the real thing, but from this Luddite's perspective, everything looks pretty squared away. On top of that, Sector 3 Studios have consulted with a number of drivers in the development of these cars, and in my opinion, it shows. As a final thought before I move on, I really have to commend the force feedback. This is something that Sector 3 seems to have been improving with every new build of the game and with each new car release. The feeling you get through the wheel is incredibly instructive, and I really do feel like I'm driving a front-wheel drive car. I'm not going to go into each of the cars in excruciating detail because life is short, but here's a quick rundown of what I think of each of the 7 cars in the Raceroom WTCR pack. Starting off with a Hyundai i30, which was surprisingly, well for me at least, one of my favourite cars in the pack. This car feels planted and agile, aided tremendously by what seems to be a pretty great stock setup. For me, this car manages to sit in between some of the more sedate cars in the pack and the slightly more leery ones, and as such makes a really good baseline for comparison. Next up is the Audi RS3, which is probably the most planted car in the pack. It's easy to drive and very forgiving, though as a consequence of the fairly conservative stock setup, it does feel a little sluggish compared to the other cars. I've not had time to experiment, but I'm fairly certain that with some tweaks you could get it to be a little bit more responsive on turn-in. However, I don't know how much stability you'd have to sacrifice in the process. Now, the VW Golf GTI feels very similar to the Audi. Again, it's forgiving and stable under braking and through the corners. However, it does feel a little bit more agile on turn-in. That being said, I did find it one of the more forgettable cars in the pack, which I'm sure will anger the legions of Golf GTI fans out there. As with the Audi, I feel that the stock setup is pretty conservative, and if you want a more responsive, lively driving experience, it can probably be achieved with some subtle tweaking. The Honda Civic is in a similar ballpark to the Audi as well, but thankfully it doesn't feel quite as heavy. In fact, I'd argue that this is one of the better cars to give you a feel of what the pack does. As far as handling characteristics go, it's probably slap bang in the middle. The Civic feels like a well set up race car in its stock form, and is one of the few cars in the pack that feels like you could do a double stint at the Nürburgring 24 hours without killing yourself. Next up is the Peugeot 308, which is, in my opinion at least, rubbish. It needs to be treated like a delicate flower, and seems so much more sensitive to weight transfer management than any of the other cars, which is saying something. Consequently, lift-off oversteer is severe. This may well be down to the stock setup being a little bit off the mark, but honestly I was having such a bad time driving the Pug that I wasn't really willing to put the time in to solve it. Moving on from that low point, the final two cars are, alongside the i30, my favourites in this pack. First up is the Seat Cupra, which feels like a slightly more agile Civic to me. It's a little looser at the rear and is a little bit more susceptible to lift-off oversteer, but it all feels very manageable. This is a good car and I can see it being very popular. Finally, the Alfa Romeo Giulietta. This was a car that I really wanted to like, and it doesn't disappoint. This is the car that I felt most comfortable driving on the limit. It really urges you to throw it into the corners and feel out the grip level as you go. Sure, you do have to be precise with it, and gentle management of weight transfer is a must, but this car feels racy. It's not the most forgiving car in the pack, but once you've got your head around how these cars drive, I'd argue that the Alfa is the most rewarding. So, to start wrapping things up, all of the cars are very well modelled and look pretty convincing to me. However, they are a little bit let down by the textures when compared to the best that's out there. Though this is something that seems to be fairly common to Raceroom cars, so that may be a limitation of the title itself. The skins are, as you would expect from a pack representing a real-world racing series, absolutely spot on. Now, I've not mentioned sound up until this point, mainly because it's exactly as you would expect it to be with Raceroom. The cars sound like the real thing, which is to say, not all that impressive. But they sound unimpressive in a very accurate, well-modelled way. If nasal sounding 2-litre turbos with lots of gear train and diff noise is your thing, then you'll want to turn it up to 11. But for those of us that exist in the centre part of the bell curve, the cars sound a bit naff. Moving on, as for value, I paid around £13 for all 7 cars, which I think is pretty well priced, though that may be because I've been getting back into iRacing recently. Don't forget, if you're going to buy any of these cars or the pack in its entirety, then you should buy VRP from the Raceroom store and then make your purchases using the VRP, as it works out cheaper. Finally, if you come away from driving these cars bitching and moaning that front-wheel drive cars suck, then I think you've missed the point. Perhaps the best aspect of these cars, in my opinion at least, is that they force you to adapt how you drive, which means you actually have to learn something. You have to improve your driving toolkit. And that can only be a good thing. These cars require delicacy and nuance, and that may not be appealing to everyone. However, I really enjoyed thrashing these cars around against the Raceroom AI, which even on its calmest day displays a casual disregard for human life that would make Al Qaeda think, ooh, that's a bit much. But at the end of the day, it makes for good, close, fun racing, and that's what I signed up for. So that's about all I have to say about the Raceroom WTCR pack. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you did, then it would be great if you could hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. As always, thank you for donating your precious free time by watching. It is very much appreciated. So all that's left to say is goodbye, thank you for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.